All right, today we are going to talk about how to improve propulsion with pinch paddles. When it comes to propulsion, it all adds up. So, more water moved with each stroke, that's going to result in more speed. And most coaches are familiar with a dropped elbow, and so that's when there's less surface area, and they're going to get less propulsion because they're pulling through and they're just letting it go. However, a dropped wrist is just as important and it matters just as much. You still get less surface area, you still get less propulsion. And so it might actually be worse because the hand isn't interacting with the water appropriately. And so for the forearm to be effective, the water kind of has to travel up the forearm. But if the swimmer just lets go of it before it even gets there, it's going to be hard to be effective with the forearm as well. And so if you're not sure exactly what we're talking about, you look at the images here. The one on the left has a nice high stiff wrist. And then the other one, the wrist is bending. And so what you'll see is some swimmers pull through and they just kind of let go like that. And they're just letting go of all the water. They're not getting much out of the pull. And so that's what we're going to work on today. So how can you make pinch paddles even more effective? One, you can turn up the speed. So the faster they go, the more pressure there's going to be on the paddle, the more force they're going to have to be able to create, and the harder it's going to be to be able to maintain that paddle control. So that's going to make it more difficult. You can add stroke count, so they have to be super efficient with each pull too. They can't just spin their way through it. You can add stroke rates to force them to try to do things at a faster speed and with more tempo. You can take away the legs, so you put a buoy on them, you put a band on them, you put a band and buoy on. Now they have to create all the propulsion with their arms, and they can't just fake it by picking up the legs. You can have resistance. Now they've got to overcome even more resistance that can really strengthen that movement and provide a whole lot of feedback as to whether swimmers are executing the skill correctly. You can use longer repetitions. As I mentioned before, it's going to put some strain on those muscles, and the longer you work them for, the more you're going to train them. And you can actually build strength with longer stuff too. It's a little bit of a different type of strength, but it's just as important. You can also pair it with upside down paddles, and so it's going to be a little bit different feel. You're still working on a locked wrist, but with the pinch paddle, you're developing the strength to execute the skill as well. And you can do all of these things in combination. So basically, you start training this skill, and that can be with full stroke swimming, it can be with drilling, it can be with almost anything. And so for swimmers that are dropping the wrist or swimmers that don't have as much strength as they should in those positions, training with pinch paddles is a really effective solution. So the solution I like, pinch paddles. Have swimmers swim, holding the paddle, pinching the paddle, like so. And the way they have to do that is if they don't have a stiff wrist, the paddle's just going to flop all over the place, so they have to be pretty stiff with the wrist as they pull through the water. So they're creating tension to stabilize the paddle. The reason I like it is it provides crystal clear feedback. Without a stable wrist, that paddle is going to be moving all over the place. And swimmers are going to feel that lack of stability, and instinctively, they're going to lock things down in order to create more stability. It also creates great sensory awareness because they can feel when they lose the position of the wrist. They can feel when things change. And so it's really effective for helping swimmers become aware of what they're doing with the wrist. The other benefit is that creates strength in the muscles that control the wrist. So if swimmers are having to create this tension and they're not used to it and they're getting a lot of resistance on the paddle as they pull through, those muscles are going to get pretty tired pretty fast. And that's going to allow them to get stronger. So you're working on the skill and you're developing the strength to execute that skill. And this can be done while swimming. It can be done with doing any sort of drill. It's really effective in a lot of different situations where you're trying to improve someone's pull. I wouldn't worry too much about the type of paddles that you're using. Just use something, just pinch it, and you should be good to go. So improving a drop wrist isn't the easiest thing in the world to do. There are technical issues. Swimmers sometimes don't realize it's happening. It can be pretty subtle, and if it's something that they've always done, they're not going to even realize that it's an issue. And also, if even they recognize it, they don't necessarily understand how to change it because it feels totally different. It's going to require a totally different type of feeling and a totally different type of way of interacting with the water. Just play with it right here. If you've never felt the stiffness that's required through the hand, it's going to be a foreign concept, and you're not just going to be able to get it. And it's also something that's hard to stay focused on. It's pretty subtle, certainly important, but it's pretty subtle, and it's hard to just continue to think about that and think about keeping a stable wrist throughout an entire practice, throughout an entire set. It's also difficult for coaches to see sometimes because sometimes it doesn't happen until the hand's under the body. And without video equipment, it's sometimes difficult to see, especially in a practice context. It's also potentially a physical issue. They don't have the wrist strength, they don't have the wrist endurance to make it happen and to make the change itself. And sometimes they lack strength overall. So they might get into a good solid pulling position, but as soon as they try to apply pressure, they don't have the strength in their upper body. And so the easiest way to take the pressure off is just let go of the water. And then they can pull through with speed because they don't have that same pressure. And so sometimes swimmers just need to get stronger overall. And that's not something that you can just flip the switch. It's something that needs to be developed. So for these reasons, improving a drop risk can be pretty difficult to do. So here are a couple sets that you can use for pinch paddles to improve propulsion. So the first one's a little bit more of an endurance set, especially with pinch paddles. It's going to be a lot of endurance work for the wrist and the forearm. And so they're going to go 25, 50, 75, 100, 100, 75, 50, 25, and they got to take the same stroke count every lap within each swim. So the 50, they've got to have the same stroke count each 25, same thing for the 75, same thing for the 100. And so this is more of kind of like a strength endurance type of thing. And again, might not have their heart rate up through the roof, but they're going to be stressed in terms of their ability to execute that skill. Next set is 1250s, a little bit more speed-based. Odds are pull with a buoy and pinch paddles, and so now they have to use the arms. They can't fake it with the legs. And the second 25 is fewer strokes. They have to be really efficient there. Then the evens are backstroke swim, no pinch paddles. They're going to descend 1 to 3, 4 to 6, the same stroke count. Hopefully they have a better feel for what they're doing with the wrist, and they're able to be more effective with their swimming. So two pretty simple sets that you can use to help swimmers improve their ability to create propulsion, specifically helping them learn to be more effective with their wrist action and developing the strength and the skill at the same time. Give it a shot and keep it simple.